I want to get back into another bodybuilding history video here, and I want to dive in deep on one of my personal all-time favorite Mr. Olympia competitions, and that is the 1992 Mr. Olympia held in Helsinki, Finland. Now, there are a lot of interesting factors that make the 1992 Mr. Olympia one of my favorite Mr. Olympias of all time. One interesting fact about the 1992 Mr. Olympia is it was actually the last Mr. Olympia contest that was held outside of the United States in Finland. So following the 1992 Mr. Olympia, it would be held in Chicago, LA, Atlanta, and New York. And then finally, it would find its home in Las Vegas, where the Olympia is still held up until this day. So the 92 Olympia has historical significance in the sense that it was the last overseas Mr. Olympia. But there's a lot of other things that happened there as well. This was also the end of the reign of Lee Haney. So this was the first Mr. Olympia you had in a very long time where the title was wide open for a new challenger to come and take it. It was also the beginning of the reign of Dorian Yates. This would be the first Olympia that Dorian Yates would ever win. You also had some major comebacks at this 1992 Mr. Olympia, and you also would have a major tragedy following this 1992 Mr. Olympia. And we're going to get into all that in this video here, so make sure you guys stay tuned. So let's get started with this video talking about the incredible lineup that you had at the 1992 Mr. Olympia. A lot of people talk about 90s bodybuilders like it was the golden era of bodybuilding, and some of the best bodybuilders of all time came out of the 90s, and most of these bodybuilders competed at this 1992 Mr. Olympia. This was a star-studded and stacked, very, very deep lineup. You had Dorian Yates, of course, winning his first Olympia ever. You had Kevin Levrone. You had Lee Labrada, Sean Ray, Mohammed Benaziza. We're going to talk about that later in this video. Some of you guys know where this video is headed when talking about Momo Benaziza. You had Vince Taylor, Sonny Schmidt, Porter Cottrell. You also had the major comeback of Lou Ferrigno at the 1992 Mr. Olympia. We're going to talk about that later in the video as well. You also had a young Ronnie Coleman in this Olympia lineup. I believe this was Ronnie Coleman's first Olympia ever. Just look at the size difference here of Ronnie Coleman at his Mr. Olympia debut, what he looked like here versus how he would look when he would go on to win 8 Mr. Olympia titles during his insane career. This was where it all began for Ronnie Coleman here in 1992. Now, incidentally, this was not just Ronnie Coleman's Mr. Olympia debut. This was also Kevin Levrone's Mr. Olympia debut, taking second at his first Olympia ever. So this was the beginning of Kevin Levrone's career, where people really started to see the potential and how big of a threat Kevin Levrone was in the 90s. The conditioning that he had in 92, some people refer to the 92 Olympia as one of Kevin's best packages ever. So Dorian won the Olympia. Kevin took second, looking phenomenal here at his first Olympia ever. Lee Labrada taking third place here. You had Sugar Sean Ray taking fourth place here. Mohammed Benaziza taking fifth. Now let's talk about Mohammed Benaziza here. So Mohammed Benaziza, or more commonly referred to as Momo Benaziza, is one of the more tragic stories in bodybuilding. And the 1992 Mr. Olympia, where he placed in the top 6, he took fifth here, would be his last Olympia ever. And sadly, the reason why it would be his last Olympia ever was because he would pass away shortly after the 1992 Mr. Olympia. So that year's Mr. Olympia was held on September 12th, 1992, and Mohammed Benaziza would pass away not even a month later on October 4th, 1992. He did one competition after the 92 Mr. Olympia in the Netherlands, and he passed away in his hotel room at the age of 33, very shortly after that competition. Now, I believe the official cause of death for Momo Benaziza was officially cardiovascular failure that was led to by severe dehydration, which could be directly correlated to his preparation for that show, and possibly also to his preparation for the Mr. Olympia, which was just a month prior. The prepping between shows and doing that back-to-back show in the Netherlands was probably one of the reasons for that severe dehydration, which led to the cardiovascular failure. And the specific aspect of his preparation that is suspected to be the cause of that dehydration and cardiovascular failure is his use of very potent diuretics prior to that show in the Netherlands. So at 33 years old, we lost Mohammed Benaziza right after this 1992 Mr. Olympia, again, where he was fifth. He was a serious Mr. Olympia contender, crazy conditioning, very good physique, top bodybuilder of the 90s, taken at 33 years old right after this Olympia. Arguably, he could have gone on to be a challenger of the Olympia title. In fact, there's something a lot of people don't know about Momo Benaziza. He actually beat Dorian Yates early in Dorian's career at the 1990 Night of Champions, just 2 years prior to this Olympia. Momo Benaziza won that show, and Dorian Yates took second. So you could certainly make the argument that Muhammad had the potential to beat Dorian one day if he improved enough. He was a very serious bodybuilder of the 90s, and I don't think people really give him as much credit as he deserves for being as great as he was, and really the talent and potential that was lost with him when he passed away in 1992. Now, let's talk about one of my favorite parts of the 1992 Mr. Olympia, and that is the comeback of Lou Ferrigno. This is one of those things that is really one of the most exciting, one of those exciting stories in bodybuilding history that makes you a fan of the sport, and makes you want to see more. The comeback of Lou Ferrigno in 1992, despite him placing 12th, was one of those things that fans just could not wait to see Lou Ferrigno get back on stage after retiring from bodybuilding after the 1975 Mr. Olympia. And for those of you that are bodybuilding fans, you know that the 1975 Mr. Olympia was the Olympia competition that was featured in the documentary Pumping Iron. So after losing to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and in fact losing to Serge Nubret as well, Lou Ferrigno was kind of touted in that documentary as being the #1 rival to Arnold. But in that 1975 Mr. Olympia, he actually wound up taking third behind Serge Nubret and Arnold Schwarzenegger. So after that 75 Olympia, Lou Ferrigno took a massive step back from bodybuilding, and that's when he started to get involved in Hollywood and acting and the Incredible Hulk TV show. And that's where everyone thought he was done as a bodybuilder after that 75 Olympia. And you guys may remember in Pumping Iron, it heavily featured Lou and his relationship with his father, Matty Ferrigno. And the story goes that after losing to Arnold and placing third at that 75 Mr. Olympia, his father actually disowned him after that. And that's one of the big reasons why he stepped back from bodybuilding, is because that was kind of a traumatic experience for him, that placing at that Olympia. But then coming back at the 92 Olympia almost 20 years later, and he's 68 years old now, so he would have been 41 years old at the time that he made that comeback to the Olympia. And what we saw during that comeback was nothing short of incredible. We saw a brand new version of Lou Ferrigno. This was not the Lou Ferrigno that we saw in the 70s. This was a much bigger, modern-day version for the 90s of Lou Ferrigno, a modern-day version of the classic physique for the 90s. So we were used to seeing this aesthetic, classic Lou Ferrigno that we saw in Pumping Iron in the early 70s. Now we saw mass monster Lou Ferrigno at the 1992 Olympia, which a lot of people credit as being the beginning of the era of the mass monster, because this was where Dorian Yates came and won his first Olympia. And everybody says Dorian changed the game. Dorian was the first mass monster. He was the first guy that came in with this crazy amount of muscle combined with this crazy conditioning, and he set the bar so much higher for everybody else. But I think what a lot of people neglect to remember is that Lou Ferrigno came in that 1992 Mr. Olympia around 300 pounds on stage at 6'5". He was massive. He was easily the biggest bodybuilder on stage at that 92 Olympia, despite, again, He did take 12th here, so he wasn't even in the top 6. But it was a complete reinvention of Lou Ferrigno's physique. And if you look at these photos here, they had some call-outs where it was Lou Ferrigno side by side with Dorian Yates. I think they knew Dorian was going to win, and they knew a lot of people were there to see the comeback of Lou Ferrigno because it was much anticipated and publicized and people wanted to see it. So that was a call out I think they did for the fans, and not so much for actual comparison purposes because Lou and Dorian were so far apart in the actual placings. But if you actually compare the size of Lou Ferrigno and Dorian Yates, Lou Ferrigno is much bigger than Dorian, certainly from a height standpoint because Lou Ferrigno is 6'5", and Dorian is much shorter than that. But I believe Dorian competed somewhere around 260 at that first Mr. Olympia that he won. And again, Lou Ferrigno was around 300 pounds. And Lou was just a very impressive sight to be seen at that 1992 Olympia. Now, he would come back to compete at the 1993 and 1994 Olympias, and he would actually improve his placing in 93, moving up to 10th place. And then in 1994, he would do the Masters Olympia, where he actually took 2nd. So it was a relatively successful comeback that lasted about 3 years. But the 92 Olympia was where that comeback began. That's where all the excitement with the Lou Ferrigno comeback started. And again, that's one of the reasons why the 92 Mr. Olympia is one of those Olympias that gets me excited about bodybuilding. And I think it's one of those very interesting Olympias that people don't really realize how many layers there were to that Olympia and how many different exciting things contributed to that 92 Olympia that made it such a cool experience, and really goes down in Olympia history as one of the coolest ever. So that is why the 92 Olympia is one of my favorite Mr. Olympias ever. The beginning of the reign of Dorian Yates, the beginning of the era of the mass monster, the first year in the 90s the Olympia title was wide open for a new challenger, for a new champion. You had a comeback of Lou Ferrigno. You had the beginning of the careers of a Kevin Levrone, of a Ronnie Coleman. You also had the tragedy of the loss of Momo Benaziza. And all of these factors just made the 92 Olympia just such an interesting show. So that wraps it up for the video today, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. I hope you guys are enjoying these bodybuilding history videos. I plan on making many more of them. So if you do like the bodybuilding history, make sure you give this video a thumbs up to let me know you want to see more bodybuilding history content on this channel. Please subscribe to